One of the things we're going to have to do before we start tracking of any kind is to fix the rolling shutter jello effect that is prevalent in all CMOS cameras. This would include most Canon DSLR cameras and RED cameras. Just pull out your iPhone in photo or video mode and pan back and forth, and you'll see this effect called rolling shutter. It's sort of a top-to-bottom scan that gives us a skewed artifact and will affect our confused tracking software later on. So to fix this, we'll be using After Effects with the Foundry's rolling shutter plugin, which is also available for Nuke. On the Foundry's homepage, you can see some useful instructional videos as well as common settings for different CMOS cameras such as the Canon 5D Mark II, the Canon 7D, which would be comparable to the 60D and the T2i, and the RED 1 camera. The RED 1 camera, as you can see here, has the least amount of artifacting from this. This motion artifact fix can also be done with the latest version of iMovie, so check out apple.com if you want to learn more about that. However, the rolling shutter will give you a better control and calibration of this artifact fix. Okay, we're in After Effects CS5, and I'm going to go ahead and go under Edit, Preferences, Import, and make sure that all the footage we bring in gets interpolated as 23.976 frames per second. By default, in After Effects, it's set to 30, but we want to make sure that we're set at the 24 frame per second time frame that we shot this on. Otherwise, we're going to get extra frames when we create new compositions. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I'm going to go to File, Import File, and we're going to bring in these two files into the raw H.264 folder. This literally is the raw footage that we pulled off of the memory card that was inside the 7D. This is shot 1 and shot 2. They usually have a little prefix of MVI. So I'll go ahead and take both of these. Now, the first shot we have, I'll go ahead and play it through here, is the army guy kind of looking over the shoulder, and he's got a bit of a whip pan here. We can already see a little bit of the jello effect going on and the skewing here along this edge. So this is just something that's going to have a problem with our tracking information, and we're going to get a really lousy track because the computer is going to be confused. It's expecting a progressive solid image per frame that's not skewed or warped, but with CMOS chips, with whip pans and so forth, we get these kind of problems. So in order to fix this, each one of these different scenes will have its ups and downs. Here's shot 2. I'll go ahead and play that through. This one's not too bad. It's only when we actually turn around right here that we'll have a little bit of issue with his pants right here that are folding in the wind. Then the whip that kind of comes along here, the kind of whip pan. So the first one we're going to go ahead and set up is for the first shot, and that would be shot number 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our comp. I'll take the footage for shot 1 and bring it over this little icon right here. Just go ahead and create a comp. If I right-click on the comp and go to Composition Settings, you can see I have 1920 by 1080, square pixels 23976, starting frame 1, duration 142 frames. So I'm going to first kind of go through my scene here and find an area where there's a lot of heavy motion or motion blur. And I think this frame right here, frame 138, looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and add the filter. And that is under the Foundry. Now, according to the website, our correction should be 0.62 because we're using the 7D. Again, check for their website as far as what yours is. The vector detail is set to 0.2. This usually doesn't go any higher between 0.2 and 0.5. Any higher than that will create more problems. What this basically means, if I set this to 0.5, it means every other pixel it becomes a tracking point. And that tracking point looks to the next frame for the same contrast point or detail, such as maybe right here at this tip of this pond, and then moves to the next one and next one and next one. So you have more tracking dots and can actually introduce more problems. So a good kind of mid-ground is usually 0.3. Smoothness I usually don't change. 0.5 is fine. It just kind of like blurs together things that might be problems. Shutter sync has to do with the actual tracked point making the image based on the back tracks and the forward tracks. And by doing that together, kind of both, it can create kind of artifacts. But depending on if you just do interpret the footage all the way forward from frames 1 all the way forward or all the way backward. Again, forward would be 0, 0.5 would be middle, and 1 would be backward. So by default, this usually stays at a 0.5, but you can find if you set this to 0, it'll fix some problems. So we're going to go ahead and start looking for artifacts on here, and the artifacts will come as little blotches and so forth. And you can see right here we already got some up here. And this has to do mostly with the distance that the tracked point goes. So if the trackers track this little area, it needs to be able to reach out as far as it can, depending on the width of the pan. So if I open up advanced, block size at 6 would be good for shots that are not moving really fast. But for instance, in this shot, things are moving pretty fast. We want to increase this until this artifact goes away. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this to 8. And I'll bring it to 9, maybe 10. And we're starting to see the artifact disappear. So to be on the safe side, we probably want to shoot for something like 15. That's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and look at the difference here. Here's before and here's after. And there's a little bit of a shift there. You might think that's not a big deal. But as you can see, even on this line right here, there's a huge skew difference here. And that's because of the rolling shutter kind of moving across and giving us that skew. So that's it for shot number 1, and we're going to go ahead and move on to creating shot number 2, which we're going to introduce some of the other options inside of rolling shutter. Moving on to shot number 2, I'm going to go ahead and grab the second shot and create a new comp. And here's the comp itself. As we can see, this is a little bit more frames. So I'll go to composition settings. You can see we've got a frame rate of 341. Again, making sure our frame rate is set to 24 frames per second in video. And as I go through here, I'm not going to have any issue with these first areas right here because everything's moving pretty smoothly. What I am going to have an issue with is any kind of whip pan. So I'm going to look for blurriness in my image again. And I'm going to choose probably an area like right here, which is frame 211. Let's see if I can find a little bit more blur. There we go. 196 looks good. So with this setup, I'm going to go ahead and take it and add again that filter. So I'll go to rolling shutter, and I'll put this to 0.62. Vector details, we usually set this to something like 0.3. And with that said, we're going to go ahead and now adjust our block size. So first we got to start hunting for artifacts. And you'll find that if you just turn off the effects, you can start to look for the artifacts. I'm just going to pull it off there, turn it back on. And so far it's handling pretty well. I'm going to turn off the effect and kind of move over to a shot like right about here. And what I'm looking for is, again, the little artifacts that you usually get. In this case, we can see them right here, and they're a little bit blotchy. To see this better, I'm going to bring my block size down to 3, and you should be able to see them a little bit better. Actually, you can't. So even if I bring this up to something like 10, it might fix it up a little bit, but we're still getting this kind of aura halo effect going on here. And I'll go ahead and just show you the difference. Here's the before, here's the after. So what do we do about this sort of circumstance? One of the things you can try is the luminance correct. This is in case your scene changes in brightness, such as you walk through a scene, it started out dark and a cloud kind of covered the area, and then now it kind of becomes bright again, which can happen especially on the day that we shot because we had really fast moving clouds in the wind. And that's what you can do with called luminance correct. And it does a little bit of a fix, but we don't really have that problem in here. We have a pretty universal lighting situation all the way through the scene. But say you had a shot where there was actual lighting changing, you would want to turn this on so it doesn't cause any problems. Because whenever a tracked scene is moving through and the lighting changes, it confuses the tracker. So that's what you use that for. I can go over to show vectors really quick, and I can see where the problems may lie. And the problems usually lie in areas where you got big clusters or clouds of actual track points, such as like right here. So I'll go ahead and turn off vectors really quick and just look for the artifact itself, which is it's not doing too bad actually. Again, the thing to remember about rolling shutter, it's not a end-all to everything. It's a filter created by Foundry to fix the problem of rolling shutter, but it doesn't guarantee a perfect shot. It does a very good job, but you're never going to get 100% clean. And you probably won't notice these small details anyway. So how to fix this? Well, there's a couple ways of doing that, and that could be the shutter sync. We can bring this to 0. And as you can see, I'll go ahead and turn it off. We start to introduce other artifacts. And let's try this to 1. And that's not looking too bad. I'm not seeing too many artifacts. So the usual fixes, I usually set this to 0.62, vector details to 0.3, smoothness to 0.5, and the two things I usually tweak are the shutter sync and the block size. So I'm going to go ahead and just search through my shot again. I'm going to look for artifacts. I don't want to just stop here. I want to turn off the effect, come on over here, turn on the effect and see if I can spot some kind of artifacts. And this shot's doing pretty good. Also, always check around the edges of your scene here. If you're not careful, you could end up spotting them. Let's see if I can find some here. It looks like it's doing a pretty good job. So the usual tweak is the block size, depending on how big your whip is. Again, really static shots, you want to keep that at 0.6. You never want to go anywhere below or above 6 to 15 to 20. Probably around 6 to 20 for the block size. So that's pretty much it. We've got shot 2 already figured out and ready to be exported. So before we actually export these out, we want to set one little option under the rolling shutter. And I'll just come in here and load it up. If you come under the Advanced tab for these, you'll see a little option here that is called filtering. We want to set this to extreme. Now, anytime we're previewing and kind of scrubbing through and trying to fix problems, we want to leave this to normal. But to retain the super sharpness, we want to turn this to extreme. And this is going to create a longer render time on here per project. So I'll go ahead and load up this shot, which is shot number 1, and we'll make sure that one is also set to extreme. Again, if you're previewing stuff, you want to put this over to normal. So here's shot 1, and let's go ahead and add this to the render queue. So I'll do a composition, add to render queue, and I'll take shot number 2 and composition, add to render queue. So this first shot right here, we want to set the output module to format of TIFF sequence. You can use TIFF or target sequence. In this case, I think we're going to just go ahead and choose the target sequence and hit OK. And for the output name, I'm going to go to live action 3 passes plate, and I'm going to name this shot 1 underscore UNC dot, and then bracketed numerical, 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 and then bracket, and that's going to give us a 3 integer frame. And it's going to be nicely isolated, as you can see here, between these. And it's important to have this isolation between dots because Maya will not be able to read the actual image. So for the same thing, we'll go over here for shot number 2, and we'll go ahead and switch this over to a target sequence and change the output again to shot underscore 2 underscore UNC dot, and then I'll put in the old brackets since I erased them and make it numerics, and that should be good. Now, we're going to also kill 2 birds with 1 stone because we're going to be exporting 4 total image sequences. We need a proxy that can play back JPEG sequences really, really smooth, such as in Maya or inside of Synthesize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these 2 right here and say duplicate with file name. So we have a duplication here, and the only thing I'm going to change is what kind of sequence they are and their names. So we're going to change both of these over to JPEG sequence. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and change this from shot UNC to capital PROXY, or proxy. So for the sake of memory on our computer, we'll be able to scrub through this inside of Maya as well as inside of Synthesize, just for the sake of speed and memory. So with that all done, I'm going to go ahead and hit render. Alright, so as you can see, it has taken, in combination of all of these files, over an hour to actually render out the scenes. Now, if we had this set to something like normal, we wouldn't have this issue. So you might want to do normal for the JPEGs, and for the uncompressed version that we're going to actually composite with, you'll want to set that probably to extreme. But it's up to you, and this is just the nature of the beast with CMOS chips. So from here, we're going to move on to actual tracking inside Synthesize.